Trauma-Informed Advocacy, Dr. Christopher Wilson, PsyD. Dr. Christopher Wilson is a retired psychologist and the director of Being Trauma-Informed, an organization dedicated to making the science of trauma accessible and practical for individuals and organizations. Dr. Wilson trains advocates, attorneys, law enforcement officers, and judges across the country.
My name is Chris Wilson. I'm a retired psychologist and the director of Being Trauma-Informed, an organization dedicated to making the science of threat and trauma accessible and practical. Today, I want to spend just a few minutes sharing with you some of the essential science that underlies the practice of being trauma-informed as an advocate, so that we're all on the same page. At BTI, we think of being trauma-informed as the process of allowing the science of threat and trauma to inform the way we work with survivors. To that end, I want to share a little bit of the science and a few of the practical applications we think form the foundation of any practice of trauma-informed advocacy. Before we dive in, let's make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to our definition of trauma. While there are many legitimate definitions out there, we prefer to think of trauma as a combination of threat plus lack of control. Now, there are three really important points to make about this definition. First, this definition of trauma is subjective, meaning that what you might find threatening, I might not find threatening. What I might experience as a lack of control, you might not. We have to keep that in mind when we're working with survivors. Second, it's also contextual, meaning what you may experience as threatening in one context, say two people running at you screaming when those two people are strangers and you're in a store. You might not experience that as threatening in another context. For example, the two people are your children running toward you, screaming in delight at the airport because you've been away. And third, it's crucial to understand that when we say threat, we're not just talking about physical threat, but threat to status. Let's unpack this last point just a bit. When we say threat to status, what we mean is a threat to your sense of being a part of any particular group or category with which you identify. So, for example, the idea of divorce is a threat to your status if you're married or have a partner. The idea of getting fired is a threat to your status as an employee. The thought of not being believed is a threat to your status as a credible reporter of what's happened in your life, which I'm sure many of you can understand. That's a really important status for folks who are reporting crimes like domestic violence and sexual assault. So let's talk about a little more of the science. Now, most of you have probably heard about how the brain reacts to threat. But what I'd like to talk about today is what is going on in the brain before it ever detects threat, and how can that help us be trauma-informed? Well, here's what's happening. Before you ever detect threat, your brain is, on an ongoing basis, meaning literally all the time, your brain is consistently, subconsciously or subcortically, meaning beyond your conscious awareness, mapping the environment to either safety or threat. This means your brain is consistently on the lookout for any indication of threat, either to you physically or to your status. And when it picks up on anything that the brain associates with threat, your brain maps the environment to threat. This doesn't mean that the threat is actually present. It just means your brain has picked up on something it associates with the potential for the presence of threat. Think of it as a risk assessment. Now, you've all probably heard about how trauma can result in something called hypervigilance. Well, this is the product of mapping the environment to threat more often than usual. Meaning, when we map the environment to threat, we become more vigilant. In this context, that means subconsciously aware of the environment. The impact of trauma on our brain is that after a trauma, we will be more likely to map environments that used to indicate map of safety to threat. So, for a victim of domestic violence, if your abusive partner used to call you on the phone or send you text messages that were abusive, and you hear that same ringtone years later, whether it's your phone or someone else's, you will map that to threat. That means you're gonna feel a higher level of anxiety for a moment or unease, and you may not have any idea why. You may feel like something's wrong with you. So, what does this mean for us as advocates? Well, we're going to focus on two implications in this video. The first is that it's very important for us to realize that our system, our offices, ourselves, none of this may be map of safety to a victim of crime. If anything in the environment reminds the victim's brain of the trauma they suffered in the past, the brain will map the environment to threat. This means our client may be paying more attention to the words we use, our facial expressions, the tone of our voice. It can mean they're having a harder time focusing and paying attention to what we're discussing, and it can mean ultimately that we have to repeat information or give a survivor more time to make sense of what we're talking about. The second thing it means is that our clients may be experiencing hypervigilance in their own homes, their workplace, their car, anywhere that the brain picks up on things it associates with the trauma this person experienced in the past. So we have to be sensitive to the barriers this can create for folks when they want to access services. Sleep can be challenging. Eating and exercise and just staying healthy can be a challenge. Attending appointments on time or at all can be a challenge. And we have to consider that instead of folks being labeled as help rejecting or self-sabotaging, which can be re-traumatizing, we have to learn to see this as trauma reactive behavior, just the brain doing what the brain does. Part of why this is such a crucial skill for an advocate is that victims and survivors of crime usually can tell when they aren't reacting to the environment in the way they used to. They notice that they're less organized, less able to focus, less able to be on time or even show up for meetings, and they assume something's wrong with them. As advocates, we can't buy into that message. We have to understand the science says all these reactions are just the brain doing what the brain does in response to a traumatic experience. So we basically want to treat people not as if something is wrong with them, but as if something wrong happened to them, and that's a huge difference. Now, we'll finish this video talking about what we can do to try to encourage someone's brain to map us to safety. To be fair, there's many more than the following three ideas, right? There's lots of ways to get people to map you to safety, but we think these three ways form a solid foundation for being trauma informed. So what does it mean to be victimized? It usually means having some element of choice taken away from you, right? So lack of choice then becomes associated with threat. So we want to give people simple choices: where to meet, when to meet, where to sit, how they'd like to be addressed. Whenever we can do that, we provide their brain with the opportunity to map choice to safety. Second, for many victims of crime, and in particular domestic violence and sexual assault, if the experience is one of being victimized by someone known to you, lack of transparency is map of threat. So anything we can do to be transparent, upfront about who we are, the reason for the meeting, how the meeting will play out, or if it's about testifying, where they'll be testifying, who will be asking the questions. This transparency offers the possibility for the brain to map to safety. Let me give you an example of this last concept from my own life. In high school, I had a traumatic experience at the dentist. I had to have some wisdom teeth removed, and my dentist didn't believe that my system needed more painkillers than most folks. It was absolutely horrifying. It was painful, and I felt an incredible lack of control. I avoided the dentist for years. Now, about 7 or 8 years ago, I had to have a tooth removed, and I went to the dentist extremely anxious. The first thing the dentist said to me was, "I know you've had a bad experience in the past at the dentist. I want to be really clear that I want you to know everything we're going to do today. I want to explain it to you as we're going. And if you have any questions, I want you to raise your hand. Just let me know and we can talk about it. Folks, I almost started crying. I felt my entire body relax. That's mapping to safety. The last concept is what I call safe eyes, a stance of compassion, which accompanies a calm, pleasant facial expression, a warm tone of voice, relaxed body language, and attentive reactions to what someone is saying. This all makes up the notion of safe eyes that says, I honor your experience. Now, the opposite is something called hard eyes. Imagine someone just staring at you, responding in monotone, distracted, maybe even taking notes. Safe to say, it's really important that as advocates, we understand that sometimes when we are just concentrating and focused, we have hard eyes. And to the client, to the survivor, it doesn't matter why we have hard eyes. It just matters that we have hard eyes. So be aware when you're tired, be aware when you're frustrated, be aware when you're hungry. These are all conditions that can result in us slipping into hard eyes. We can't assume we're always safe eyes people, even though in our hearts we may be safe eyes people. It's basically the difference between expressing genuine appreciation for someone's experience. Thank you for taking the time to watch these videos, to go through this toolkit. And somebody who's just completely focused on the task. Appreciate you watching the videos. Did you get that done? Good. It's hard not to feel the difference, right? Even a few seconds of hard eyes in a meeting with a client, with a survivor, can be really jarring. To be trauma-informed, we have to have safe eyes all the time. So, trauma-informed advocacy starts with choice, transparency, and safe eyes. That's all we have today. Thank you for the work that you do. Take care.